The rain had stopped an hour ago, but Della Rhodes still stood under the awning outside Hendry's Loan and Trade, working up the nerve to push open the door. In the reflection of the glass, she looked like someone she didn't recognize, a thin woman in a canvas jacket, 2 sizes too big, a paper folder pressed against her chest like a shield. Inside the folder were 4 things she had sworn once that she would never sell. She had told herself that at 19 and at 23, and again at 28 when the discharge paperwork came through and the floor of her whole life gave way. Never these. Whatever else went, not these. She was 31 now, and the rent on the room she was renting from Bree Nolan was 11 days late, and her mother's insulin cost $290 for a box that lasted 3 weeks, and the money in Della's checking account, when she'd looked at it on the cracked screen of her phone that morning, had been 16s and 40 cents. So she opened the door. A bell jingled. The shop smelled like old brass and machine oil and the particular staleness of things that had been loved once and then given up. Behind a long glass counter stood a heavy-set man in his 60s, reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, forearms like he'd spent his youth doing something harder than pawnbroking. He looked up at her the way men his age looked at young women who came into pawn shops alone, not unkind, just careful, already half-guessing the shape of the trouble that had walked in. "Afternoon," he said. His name, according to the faded sign over the register, was W. Hendry. "What can I do for you?" Della set the folder on the counter. Her hands, she noticed, were steadier than the rest of her. Field-matic hands. You could shake all you wanted on the inside as long as your hands stayed still, because a soldier bleeding out could read panic in your fingers faster than in your face. She opened the folder. 4 medals lay on the manila paper. A bronze star with a small bronze V device pinned to the ribbon. A purple heart, the profile of Washington gleaming under the shop's fluorescent lights. A combat medical badge, and an Army Commendation Medal, its ribbon a little frayed at one edge from the day she'd worn it to her father's funeral and gripped it in her fist through the whole service. Hendry didn't reach for them right away. He looked at them, and then he looked at her, and something in his face changed. The careful half-guessing dropped away and was replaced by something quieter and more difficult. "These are yours," he said. It wasn't a question. "They're mine. That's a Valor Bronze Star." He touched the little V with one thick finger, gently, the way you'd touch something you weren't sure you were allowed to. "And a Purple Heart." He drew a slow breath through his nose. "Miss, I've had people bring me their granddad's medals, their uncles. Once a fella tried to sell me a silver star he'd bought off the internet, thought I wouldn't know the difference." He shook his head. "I don't get the person who earned them coming through that door. Not often. I need to make rent," Della said, because she'd decided in the parking lot that she wasn't going to dress it up. Dressing it up made it worse. "And my mom's diabetic. Her medication, it's a lot, every month. I can't get the kind of work I train for right now. It's complicated." She heard her own voice going flat and clinical, the voice she used to use to tell a man. His leg was gone before he'd looked down and seen it for himself. "How much can you give me for them?" Hendry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sit down a second," and pulled a wooden stool from behind the counter and set it on her side of the glass. "You're not going anywhere for 2 minutes. Let me look at these right." But she stayed. He picked up the bronze star and turned it under a little jeweler's lamp, and while he did, the bell over the door jingled again. Della didn't turn around. She was watching Hendry's hands, so she heard the dog before she saw it. The click of nails on the tile, then a sudden stop. A stillness. And then a sound she knew in her bones before her brain caught up. A low sound in an animal's chest that wasn't a growl and wasn't a whine. That was the noise a working dog makes when a scent hits it that its whole body remembers. Koda. Heel. A man's voice, easy, used to being obeyed. "Koda, come on, heel." The dog did not heel. Della turned around then, and there in the middle of Hendry's Loan and Trade stood a German shepherd, a big one, dark saddle over a rust-colored coat, gone completely rigid with its ears pricked forward and its nose working the air. It was wearing a service vest, the kind with a padded handle, and holding the other end of the leash was a man about her own age, maybe a little older. Broad through the shoulders, close-cropped beard going early gray at the chin, standing with the slightly stiff-hipped gait of someone whose body had done more than its share of hard landings. He had the leash wrapped once around his wrist, and he was leaning back against a dog that outweighed its own good sense and wouldn't move. "Sorry," the man said to the room in general. "He doesn't usually, Koda." He clicked his tongue. "We'll come back." "Sorry." The dog took a step toward Della, then another, and then, with the leash gone taut and the man saying its name in a voice that had gone from casual to genuinely confused, the shepherd crossed the little shop, put its nose against the leg of Della's oversized jeans, and shoved its whole head against her hand, hard, and let out a sound that was unmistakably a cry. Della went very still. She had not touched a dog in 3 years. She'd made a point of it. But her hand moved on its own, down to the broad flat plane between the shepherd's ears, and the dog pressed up into her palm and made that sound again, and Della felt the floor of her whole life give way for the second time in 3 years, except this time it wasn't grief opening under her. It was something she didn't have a name for yet. "Ma'am," the man said carefully, coming closer. "Do you? I'm sorry, this is going to sound crazy. Do you know my dog?" Della's mouth was dry. "What's his name?" she managed. Her voice came out rough. "What's his tattoo? His ear tattoo? What are the numbers?" The man went quiet. When he answered, his own voice had changed. "He's a retired MWD," he said. "Military working dog. I got him through the adoption program 18 months ago, after his handler." He stopped, started over. His original handler was killed. He was a casualty detection and medical alert dog deployed out of a forward base in Helmand, 2019-2020. I've got his whole jacket in the truck. "Why?" Della crouched down. Her knees hit the tile, and the dog turned in against her and put its full weight into her chest, 60 pounds of shaking shepherd, and shoved its face up under her chin, and she wrapped both arms around it and pressed her face into the fur over its shoulder and smelled, faintly, under the shampoo and the road dust and the 18 months of another life, something she would have sworn she'd forgotten. "Kandahar," she said, into the dog's neck. "Not Helmand. He was cross-attached to a route clearance element out of Kandahar in the spring of 2020. There was a strike on a resupply convoy in April. 3 vehicles. I was the senior medic on the ground." She lifted her head. Her eyes were wet and she didn't care. "This dog found a soldier under the second vehicle that we'd called dead. We'd triaged him black. Koda wouldn't leave the wreck. He kept alerting, and everyone thought he was scenting the ones we'd already pulled, and I almost let them pull me off. And I didn't. And there was a kid under there with a pulse you couldn't find at the wrist. Specialist Reyes. He's alive right now because this dog wouldn't move." The man, the handler, had gone completely still. Behind the counter, Walt Hendry had set down the bronze star and was standing with both hands flat on the glass. "You're Rhodes," the handler said. It came out like a man discovering the last name in a story he'd only ever heard the middle of. "Sergeant Rhodes, the medic. He's got you in his file, not by name, but the incidents in his write-up. The convoy strike. He got a citation for that find." He crouched down across from her, and the dog wouldn't let go of her, and he looked at her over its heaving back. "I'm Gideon Barlow. I was a Marine. I run a program now, out past Dutch Falls, service dogs for vets, and I take the MWDs nobody else can place. Koda's been with me a year and a half, and I have never once seen him do that." He nodded at the dog buried in her arms. "Not once. He grieves quiet. He doesn't cry. He remembers me," Della said, and heard how much she needed it to be true. "Yeah," Gideon said. "He does." For a long minute, nobody in the shop said anything. The dog's breathing slowed. Della kept her hand moving over its ribs, the old rhythm, the one she used to use on it in the dust of that base when the mortars came in at night and even a bomb dog was allowed to be afraid. Then Walt Hendry cleared his throat, and Della remembered where she was and why, and the whole cold weight of the afternoon came back down on her. She stood up. She didn't want to. "Sorry," she said to Gideon. "I've got to finish." She turned back to the counter, back to the 4 medals lying open on the manila folder under the jeweler's lamp, and she saw Gideon Barlow's eyes go to them and understand all at once exactly what he had walked into. "Those are yours," he said. Same words Hendry had used. "Same weight." "I've heard," Della said. "You're selling them." "I'm trying to." Gideon stood up too. He looked at the medals, and he looked at her jacket, the one that didn't fit, and he looked at the way she was standing, which was the way people stood when they'd learned to make themselves small in rooms, and he asked the question that everyone in her old life had stopped asking a long time ago. "What happened to you, Rhodes?" And because the dog was leaning against her leg, and because Walt Hendry hadn't named a price, and because she was so tired of carrying it alone that her arms had started to ache, she told them. She told them she'd stayed in after that deployment, that she'd made sergeant, gone to a stateside post, kept doing the work. She loved the work. That was the thing nobody ever understood. She loved being the person who ran toward the worst thing in the room. And she told them that in her 3rd year at that post, she'd started noticing a pattern in the medical readiness files. Soldiers being cleared for deployment who shouldn't have been. A private with an untreated stress fracture cleared as fit. A specialist with a documented cardiac arrhythmia cleared as fit. Profiles being closed early. Restrictions being lifted. Physical therapy referrals disappearing out of the system, all under one signature. The battalion's medical officer, a major named Dean Corbett, who was under enormous pressure to keep the unit's deployable strength numbers up, because deployable strength numbers were how a battalion commander got promoted, and a battalion commander who got promoted remembered the major who'd made it happen. I brought it up my chain, Della said, quietly, first. I brought it to Corbett himself. He told me I was misreading the files. He told me I didn't have the training to interpret them, which, I'm a combat medic with a Valor Award and 11 years in, and he's telling me I can't read a physical profile. She let out a breath. I documented everything. Screenshots, printouts, the whole thing. Then that private with the stress fracture, the one Corbett cleared, he went down a rope on a training rotation, and the bone shattered, and he'll walk with a cane the rest of his life. And I filed a formal complaint. IG complaint. I put my name on it. And Gideon said, though his jaw told her he already knew where this went. And about 5 weeks after that, I got flagged for an investigation. Diversion of controlled substances. Della's voice didn't break, but it went to a place near breaking and stayed there. Missing morphine from the aid station inventory. My name on the sign-out log, in handwriting that was mostly mine and partly not, for quantities that were never in my possession. There was a witness who swore he'd seen me pocket vials. I'd never met the man before that hearing. It was clean. It was really clean. Somebody who knew exactly how those systems work built it. And I was the medic, so of course it was the medic. We're the ones with the keys to the narcotics box. She looked down at the medals. I never went to trial. They offered me an administrative separation. Other than honorable. My lawyer, the one the Army gave me, who had 40 other cases, told me if I fought it and lost I could do time, and if I took the OTH, I'd walk out the gate that week. I was 28 and I was scared and I took it. An OTH discharge, Walt Hendry said slowly from behind the counter. That's your VA benefits gone. Everything gone. No GI Bill, no VA healthcare, no home loan, and a character of service on my paperwork that says this person is not to be trusted. She laughed, and there was nothing in it. I trained as a nurse before I ever enlisted. I've got a 2-year degree and 11 years running trauma in the worst conditions on Earth, and I can't get my nursing license validated in this state because when the board runs my military record, that OTH lights up like a flare, and controlled substance diversion next to a nurse's name means nobody will touch me. I've been cleaning offices at night. I take home health cash jobs when I can get them, private pay, off the books, because the families don't run background checks. That's how I pay for my mother's insulin. That's why I'm here. She flattened her palm on the counter beside the medals, gently, like they might spook. So, what'll you give me for them, Mr. Hendry? Walt Hendry looked at the medals for a long time. Then he pushed them, very carefully, an inch back across the glass toward her. I'm not going to give you anything for them, he said. Della felt her stomach drop. You think they're fakes? No, ma'am. I think they're the realest things that have been on this counter in 20 years. He took off his reading glasses and folded them and set them down. I did 14 months in the Mekong Delta in 1969, and I came home to people spitting on the floor when I walked past. And it took this country the better part of 30 years to say sorry. And some of the boys I served with never lived to hear it. His voice was even, but his eyes weren't. I'm not going to be the man who buys a Valor Bronze Star off a soldier who's cleaning offices at night so her mama can have her medicine. I won't do it. You put those back in that folder. Mr. Hendry, I need the money. How much is the rent? Della hesitated. 11 days late. $600 with the late fee. Walt Hendry opened the register and Gideon Barlow said, No, Walt, no. Put it away and reached for his own back pocket, and for one absurd moment, the two of them nearly got into an argument over which of them was going to pay a stranger's rent. and Della stood between them with her medals and her folder and something enormous and painful cracking open behind her ribs. Because it had been 3 years since anyone had reached toward her instead of away, and now there were two of them at once, and a dog with its head against her knee, and it was too much. She had to put her hand over her mouth. "Stop," she said through her fingers. "Both of you, stop. I didn't come in here for charity. I came in here to make a fair trade, and I've got exactly one thing left to trade." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "I appreciate it, I do. But $600 isn't going to fix this. $600 gets me to the end of the month, and then I'm right back here. The problem isn't the rent. The problem is the paper. The problem is that as far as the United States government is concerned, I'm a thief who got out easy, and there's nothing anybody in this shop can do about that." And Gideon Barlow, who had gone quiet again, who had been watching her with the flat, assessing calm of a man who was used to fixing broken things that other people had written off, said, "Maybe, maybe not. Tell me about the officer who buried you. The one who built the case, Corbett, he's still in? Last I knew." Della shrugged. "He'd be a lieutenant colonel by now, I'd guess. He was on the promotion track. That was the whole point." Gideon was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I need you to sit down, and I need you to tell me every name. Because I spent 9 years in a job where my whole life depended on knowing who I could call, and I made a lot of friends, and some of them wear stars now, and some of them owe me things you can't put a number on." He pulled the wooden stool over, and this time she sat, and the dog folded itself down across her feet with a groan, a warm, heavy weight anchoring her to the floor. "Somebody built that case against you," Gideon said. "That means there's a somebody. And somebody built it too clean, which means at least one person who signed off on it knew it was clean, and knowing something is dirty and staying quiet, that eats at people. It eats at them for years. You'd be amazed what falls out of a man when he's about to retire and he's looking back at the one thing he can't square." He crouched to her level. "Who was on your separation board, Rhodes? Who ran it? Who signed?" Della closed her eyes and reached back into a week of her life she'd spent 3 years trying not to touch. And she gave him the names: the board president, the legal officer, the convening authority, and, after a moment, the one she'd never let herself think about too hard, because at the time she'd read it as just another signature on the stack of paper that ended her, but she'd noticed, even then, the small thing about it that hadn't fit. "There was a colonel," she said slowly. "Delgado, Frank Delgado. He was the senior medical officer on the installation. Corbett's boss, technically, way up the chain. He didn't have to be involved in an enlisted separation at all. That's beneath a full colonel, but he sat in on my board. I remember thinking it was strange, and when they read the findings, everybody else wouldn't look at me. Standard. You don't look at the person you're separating, but Delgado looked at me the whole time. Like he was trying to memorize my face, or apologize for something. I couldn't tell which." Gideon Barlow wrote the name down on the back of a business card. "Delgado," he said. "Okay." He looked up at her. "Here's what I think happened, and you tell me if I'm wrong. I think Corbett got scared when you filed that IG complaint, because you were right and he knew you were right, and he had the access and the know-how to make you into a bigger problem than the one you were pointing at. And I think when he built the case, he needed cover from up the chain, because you don't railroad a decorated combat medic without somebody senior nodding at it. And I think he leaned on Delgado, and I think Delgado nodded, because that's how these things happen. One good man too tired to fight at exactly the wrong moment." He tapped the card against his knuckle. "And I think Delgado has been carrying you around in the back of his head for 3 years. That's why he memorized your face." "Even if you're right," Della said, "he's a colonel and I'm a discharged E5 with an OTH. Nobody's going to reopen this. Do you know how many discharge upgrade applications get denied? People wait years. People die waiting." "I know exactly how many," Gideon said. "That's why you don't do it alone, and you don't do it cold, and you don't do it through the front door." He stood up. The dog lifted its head. "You do it with a colonel who's about to retire and wants to die with a clean conscience, and a valor citation nobody can wave away, and a Marine who's going to make 3 phone calls tonight. And you do it before Corbett pins on his next rank, because a man in front of a promotion board is a man with a lot to lose, and men with a lot to lose make mistakes." Della looked at him and at Walt Hendry, who had quietly closed the register and was leaning on his counter, listening like a man at a fire he didn't want to leave, and at the dog with its chin on her boot, and she felt the thing she'd been most afraid of her whole adult life, which was hope. Hope was worse than despair. Despair you could live inside. Hope could kill you. Why, she said. Why would you do this? You met me 20 minutes ago. Gideon Barlow looked down at his dog for a moment before he answered. Because he found you, he said. Because that animal walked into a pawn shop in a town he's never been to and picked you out of the whole world by the smell of your hands 3 years and 8,000 miles later. I've worked dogs my whole adult life, Rhodes. They don't do that for people who did anything wrong. They just don't. Whatever the paper says about you, that dog knows different, and I've learned to trust him over the paper every single time. He clipped the leash short. Also, I've read your citation. You went under a burning truck for a man everyone else had already written off. So no, you don't get to sell these. Not today. It did not happen fast. Later, when Della tried to tell people how it had gone, she always had to stop them from imagining it like a movie, where the wrong is righted in an afternoon and everyone weeps in a courtroom. It took 4 months. It took a mountain of paper. It took Gideon Barlow's 3 phone calls, turning into a dozen, and then a retired command sergeant, Major Herberts, with making a few of his own, and a veteran's legal clinic 2 hours away, agreeing to take the case pro bono, read the file in one sitting, and called Della back at 9 at night to say, in a voice tight with the particular anger of a good attorney, seeing a clean frame-up, that she would be honored to represent her. And it took Colonel Frank Delgado. Gideon reached him through a chain of people that Della never fully understood, a golf partner of a friend of a former battalion surgeon, something like that, the invisible web of a life spent in uniform. Delgado had retired 8 months earlier and was living outside San Antonio, and when Gideon's contact called and said the name Rhodes, the colonel was quiet on the line for so long that the man thought the call had dropped. Then Delgado said, "The medic," from Fort, and named the post. The IG complaint about Corbett's readiness numbers. That's her. I've been waiting 3 years for someone to call me about her, Colonel Delgado said. I didn't have the guts to make the call myself. God forgive me. He flew himself up on his own dime. Della met him in a conference room at the legal clinic, with Priya Naidu on one side of her and a recorder running, and the colonel, a spare, gray, careful man who did not once try to make himself the hero of the story, laid it out. He'd known. That was the plain shape of it, and he said it plainly. He had reviewed the diversion case as the senior medical authority, and he had seen the things Della had seen without ever being able to prove. The sign-out log with quantities that didn't reconcile against the pharmacy's own resupply records, a witness statement from a soldier who, it turned out, had transferred in 3 days before the alleged theft and could not have observed what he swore he'd observed. A chain of custody on the evidence with a 29-hour gap. He'd seen all of it. And he had also seen on his own desk Della's original IG complaint against Major Corbett, the one about the falsified readiness files, which had been quietly closed as unsubstantiated by the same office in the same week without a single soldier being interviewed. I knew what I was looking at, Colonel Delgado said into the recorder, and his voice did not shake, which somehow made it worse. I knew a medic who had done nothing but tell the truth was being destroyed for telling it, and I knew who was doing the destroying, and I was 18 months from a retirement I'd spent a career earning, and I had a wife with cancer and a son at West Point, and I told myself it wasn't my lane. I told myself the system would sort it out. I sat on her board so I could at least look her in the eye, which is the most cowardly thing I have ever done, because looking someone in the eye while you fail them is not courage. It's just a different way of looking away. He set a thick folder on the table. I kept copies, everything. I told myself I was keeping them in case, and then I told myself I'd never use them, and then this call came, and I realized I'd been keeping them for exactly this. So, inside the folder was the whole architecture of the frame, and beside it, the whole architecture of the thing Della had tried to report in the first place. Major Corbett's falsified readiness signatures, the closed profiles, the disappeared referrals, the private with the shattered leg. And Corbett, now Lieutenant Colonel Corbett, and, as it happened, in the zone for full colonel with a promotion board scheduled for the fall, had left fingerprints all over both. Not because he was stupid, because he'd never once imagined that a colonel would keep the receipts, or that a discharged medic cleaning offices at night would ever have a lawyer, 3 general officers taking her calls, and a witness who'd decided he'd rather die honest than comfortable. Priya Naidu did not file a discharge upgrade application and settle in for a 2-year wait. She built a package, the citation, the incident, the falsified files, Delgado's sworn statement, the reconstructed pharmacy records, the impossible witness, and she walked it, with the quiet help of people whose names never appeared on anything, straight to an inspector general who could not, once he'd read it, unread it. And she made sure the timing was exact, because Gideon had been right about men with a lot to lose. A flag went on Corbett's promotion packet the week before his board convened. Then his readiness signatures got pulled for review. Then a soldier with a cane and a very good memory got a phone call from an investigator, and the whole clean, careful thing that had been built to bury Della Rhodes came apart the way clean, careful things do when someone finally decides to pull on the loose thread. Corbett never made colonel. His command was relieved of him within the year, and there was an Article 32, and though the military justice system moved with its usual glacial dignity, and Della was long since done with it by the time it finished grinding, the outcome was that Dean Corbett left the army under a great deal less than his own honor, which was a small, cold, imperfect thing, and it was also more justice than Della had ever let herself expect. But that came later. The thing that changed her life happened on a Tuesday in the fall, when a letter arrived at Bree Nolan's house, addressed to Della Rhodes from the Army Board for Correction of Military Records, and she stood on the porch and could not open it for so long that Bree came out and opened it for her. Her discharge was upgraded. Other than honorable, struck, replaced with honorable. The diversion allegation, expunged, not resolved, not downgraded, expunged, as in it was found never to have had a basis, as in the record would now say, in the flat language of a government that almost never says it, that she had done nothing wrong. Character of service, honorable, and with that single word restored, everything downstream of it came back like water finding an old channel. Her VA benefits, her health care, and the thing that made Della sit down hard on Bree's porch steps with the letter shaking in her hands, back pay, all of it. 3 years of the disability compensation she'd been denied, plus a correction of her separation pay, plus the value of the benefits she'd been forced to go without, a number with a comma in it that the letter listed in a paragraph so dry it took her 3 readings to understand it was real. She had wondered, on the worst nights, how you were even supposed to survive long enough to be vindicated, how a person with no benefits and a blocked license and a mother who needed insulin was supposed to just endure until the paperwork caught up with the truth. And she had barely, on cash jobs and Bree's spare room in the food pantry on Delano Street, and a stubbornness she hadn't known she still owned. Now the letter in her hand said the endurance was over. The nursing board took another 2 months, because bureaucracies are bureaucracies, but with the diversion allegation expunged and an honorable discharge on file, the flare that had lit up every time they ran her record simply stopped lighting up. And one gray morning, Della Rhodes got an email that said her license had been validated in the state, effective immediately. And she read it 4 times, and then she called her mother, and neither of them could really talk for a while. She took a job in the emergency department of the regional hospital in Dutch Falls. Trauma. Of course, trauma. It was the only work that had ever fit her, being the person who ran toward the worst thing in the room, and now she got to do it with her own name on her badge and nobody looking at her sideways. There is one more thing, and it's the thing Della thinks about most, because it's the part that Gideon Barlow was right about, and the part she can never quite make peace with even now. The system did not save her. That's the truth of it, and she says so plainly when anyone asks. The same way Colonel Delgado said his part plainly. The system built the case that ruined her, and closed the complaint that would have cleared her, and stamped the paper that took her benefits and her license, and 3 years of her life. And the system would have gone right on being satisfied with all of that until the end of time. What saved her was a series of accidents so unlikely that if she'd read them in a story, she'd have thrown the book across the room. A pawnbroker who'd been spit on in 1969 and refused to buy her medals. A colonel who happened to keep his receipts and happened to still have a conscience. A Marine with the right phone numbers. And a dog, a retired bomb and blood dog named Koda, who walked into a pawn shop in a town he'd never seen and knew her by the smell of her hands. If Koda hadn't refused to leave, Della would have sold 4 medals to Walt Hendry, or she wouldn't have, and either way she'd have walked out that door and gone home to Bree's spare room and gotten up the next morning to clean offices, and the truth would have stayed buried, and Dean Corbett would be a colonel now, and the whole clean, careful thing would have held. That's not the system working. That's a dog. That's luck. That's an aberration, and it terrifies her, because for every Della Rhodes who got a dog and a pawnbroker and a colonel with a conscience, there are 100 others out there right now, veterans and nurses and teachers and every kind of person who did the right thing at the wrong moment and got flattened for it, who don't get the aberration, who just get flattened and stay flattened and clean offices at night until it kills them. She thinks about them all the time. It's why she talks about it now. But that's the hard part, and she's earned the right to also keep the soft part, so here is the soft part. Koda came home with her. It wasn't planned. In the months of phone calls and paperwork, she'd driven out to Gideon Barlow's place past Dutch Falls a dozen times. And every single time she got out of her car, the shepherd came off the porch like a fired round and hit her at the knees and cried, that same cry, and folded down across her feet and would not be moved. And Gideon watched it happen over and over, and one evening in the early winter, as she was getting ready to leave, he came out with the dog's paperwork in a folder. The adoption transfer already half filled out, her name where his had been. "He's yours," Gideon said. "He always was. I've just been holding him for you. Took the 2 of you a while to get to the same pawn shop, is all, Gideon," she said. "I can't take your dog. You're not taking my dog." He crouched down and put his hand on the shepherd's ribs one last time, in a way that told her exactly what it cost him. "I'm giving a soldier back her dog. There's a difference. And any dog trainer worth a damn will tell you the same thing I'm telling you. You don't keep a dog from the person he's decided is his. It's the cruelest thing you can do to an animal. He picked you 3 years ago under a burning truck, and he never unpicked you. He straightened up, and his eyes were bright, and he wasn't ashamed of it. Take him home, Rhodes. Let me be the guy who found the medic her dog. Every once in a while, I'd like to be the reason something ends right." So Koda rides in the front seat of Della's car now, with his head out the window, and his ears pinned back in the wind, and he slept across her feet on the floor of Hendry's Loan and Trade, and when the mortars come back in her dreams, they still come back. She wakes to 60 pounds of warm shepherd pressed against her side. Awake before she is, guarding her from a war that's been over for years. The 4 medals hang in a shadow box on the wall of the small house Della was finally able to rent, then buy with the back pay and the VA home loan she'd been denied for 3 years. The bronze star with its little bronze V, the Purple Heart, the combat medical badge, and the frayed commendation medal she'd gripped through her father's funeral. She never did sell them. Walt Hendry saw to that on a wet afternoon when a dog with a long memory decided her whole life was worth reopening. She stops in at Hendry's Loan and Trade every few weeks just to say hello, and Walt always comes around the counter to scratch the shepherd behind the ears, and every time, every single time, he says the same thing in the same gruff voice, looking not at her but at the dog. "Knew the paper was wrong," he says. "Dog told me so." And Della Rhodes, RN, honorably discharged sergeant, United States Army, who runs toward the worst thing in the room for a living, and comes home every night to a dog who waited 3 years and 8,000 miles to find her, agrees that it did.